Two of the most obvious components of what we see on the surface are color and typography. And let's start with color. Color matters. Color is a critical visual element of most user interfaces. And that's because color has associated meanings that create emotional responses. And those emotional responses will either drive us to do what is intended, or it will drive us to do something that was not intended. Either way, you have to be aware of how you're influencing behavior. So to prevent confusion in meaning, color has to be used very consistently. And in addition to that, in order to get the desired emotional response, color has to be used appropriately. Take a look at this interface design. This is for a sleep meditation app. Okay, its goal is to sort of help you relax and get into a meditative state so that you can sleep better. Now, do you see a ton of contrast? Do you see stark, black and white colors? Do you see bright day glow screaming colors? No. You see sort of this nice peach orangey type color with a nice tan background and a baby blue header up here and a typeface that is very friendly and welcoming and says, sleep, goals. Okay, everything is very sedate and subtle and pleasant. That's an instance where color use is very much in line with the intended emotional response. Certain colors are specifically used in order to provide a calming effect. So color does some pretty important things. First and foremost, the right color combination draws the eye to the most important things, the most important areas on the screen. The right color combinations maximize readability and they minimize optical fatigue. If the balance of contrast and saturation in particular is right, it means our eyes have to strain a lot less to read because we can obviously easily tell the difference between the background and the text color that's on top of it. Color also delivers symbolic meanings that support and enhance the visual experience and the elements of the design. There's an intended idea or concept that is meant to be communicated, and color goes a long way in helping reinforce that. And of course, it almost goes without saying, but color makes things look good. It pleases the eye, and if we like what we see, that sustains our visual interest, okay? It keeps us there. It makes the whole experience feel pleasurable, feel comfortable. Here's an example where a lot of those things come into play in a single interface. In terms of the most important areas on the screen, what's your eye drawn to first? Well, those blue bars are definitely points of fixation, okay? And they just happen to be headings of chunks of information, okay? They represent the different areas of information on the screen. So you can sort of quickly bounce from each bar and know almost immediately what you would find underneath. And you'll see that there's a contrasting orange color all the way up at the top where it says back to questions, okay? That's a core action, core activity. And because of that, they're using an orange color, which is a very stark contrast to the blue and white that we see below. That button, because of its color treatment and because of the neutral background that it sits on, calls attention to itself. It's very easy to go up there and have sort of an exit route. And overall, okay, color makes things look good. If you go down to these charts and graphs below where it says number of physicians in your area, they're sort of very pleasant to look at, these nice little shapes. We have a number correlation that's next to each shape. So overall, everything is put together in a way that's very visually pleasing. It's not only well organized, it's also nice to look at. Now, when you use color, you want to use it to highlight. You don't want to use it to determine. And here's what I mean. Color should never be the sole differentiator of things in an interface. It can be used to help and highlight. It can certainly be used to guide attention, but it should not be the only way you can tell the difference between one element and the next. You also do that through size. You also do that through font style. You also do that through shape. Color in and of itself can't be the only differentiator, if for no other reason than, some folks are colorblind. And therefore, if color is the only thing they have to go by in order to differentiate one thing from another, they're going to have trouble. So you should never solely rely on color to call out stark differences between items. Now, for extended screen use situations, you always want to use light, muted background colors. That means grays, it means tans, it means neutral colors that don't have a lot of saturation. Bright saturated colors should only be used as visual accents to call attention to something. And it's the kind of thing where if there's too much bright color everywhere, then everything seems like it's of equal importance. And you can't tell the difference between what's really important and what may or may not be important. It's like the old story of the boy crying wolf, who does it all the time, every day, and then when something really does happen and he's crying wolf, nobody believes him. All right, this is very, very similar. Be very selective in where you apply color to call attention to things. The way to do that is start with one dominant neutral color. And then once you have that down, add an accent color or two accent colors. Okay, but sort of work with one at a time and then add things as they make sense. What should happen is you'll start to see that if you apply too much color, things all sort of start becoming equally visually important. That's when you know you're using a color too much. So here's an excellent example of an accent color being used in a very effective way. When we're looking at this interface and we're sort of glancing at the screen to see how many messages we have, that stark orange circle really stands out. The number 3 in the orange circle jumps out from the gray background to tell us at a quick glance, less than a second, I got 3 new messages. It's repeated right below it next to the word inbox in a bit of a more subtle manner, but it's still there. Now notice that they used color very differently in both those instances. Up above in messages, when we have the orange oval and the white 3, there's a ton of contrast in that combination. So it automatically becomes the first thing that we see. It automatically assumes a position of priority. Down in inbox, the only thing that has color is the number itself. So it's still important. It still stands out from the gray background, but it's secondary. All right, so it plays second fiddle, so to speak, to that large message icon above. That's a great example of using color very sparingly and very effectively. Here's another example where color is used to highlight what's being selected currently. On the left, I've selected commissions, so therefore it's highlighted in orange. In the resulting table, the bar that I've chosen is also highlighted in a dark gray for the name and then an orange for all the relevant information. The submenu that I get below that is also called out. My default state is I'm on the Summary tab, so therefore it's got an orange outline above it. And again, just like the example that we saw previously, notice that as I drill down, color use becomes more and more spare. We went from a heavy, solid orange on the left side from the first thing that I clicked. Then we get a little more subtle treatment on the bar with the name and information in it. And then it gets even more subtle with this orange outline around the summary, and then again around the page number that I happen to be on. And this is an excellent example of how you use color to segregate and differentiate information. So if you're concerned about whether or not you're using color properly, there are some things you can do to evaluate your color use. Okay? You can evaluate color in your design by asking these questions. First, are colors used sparingly? Next, do my colors reinforce or interfere with hierarchy and content? Do they make it easier to understand the order of importance, or does it make things more confusing? Is my color scheme used consistently, right? Once I've established it, is it consistent from screen to screen to screen? Is my color use functional, or is it just decorative? And should it be one or the other, or should it be both? Does my functionality depend on color? And the corollary question to that is, would this be just as functional for someone who's colorblind? So ask yourself those questions and pay very close attention to the answers. When it comes to typography, the question that gets asked most is serif or sans serif? Which is better? Which is more readable? The bottom line is this. Some people have argued that sans serif typefaces are easier to read because they're plain. Other people have said, no, serif fonts are easier to read because the serifs, those little decorations on the end of the letter, draw the eye toward the letter. The bottom line is that research shows absolutely no difference in comprehension, reading speed, or any kind of preference between serif and sans serif fonts. This block of text that you're looking at right now is very easy to read. But you know what? So is this one. It's just as easy to read. It doesn't take you any longer to read it. It doesn't take you any longer to comprehend the meaning of it. So when someone asks you, well, is sans serif or serif better? You just say, yes. The important thing to know about using typography is that you have to use it purposefully. So anytime you're planning to use more than one typeface, each one should be very visually distinct from each other. Take a look at this example. We've got several areas where there's typography. In the logo where it says Southern Savers, immediately to the right in the navigation, printables, learn to coupon, whatever it says there. Below where it says welcome to Southern Savers, then we go down further and we see some text, etc., etc. Notice that when they use typography in the headlines and then in the body content, they're very different. That allows us to draw a very quick distinction between labels and content. So the only reason we use different styles at all is to indicate differences in the information being presented. Here's another example. This is Nike's Fuel app. Notice that workout summary is in a very different font style than everything else on the screen. Why? Because it's a general categorization. It tells you what is on the screen that you're looking at, and it stands apart from the actual content that you're meant to absorb, such as you earned 450 fuel points, or your total time was 1639, or your rank, or your calories, your distance, all these things below. When the information is different, you use a different style. Now, the same thing can also be done with font weight, bold versus regular fonts. In this example, you can see that there are several differences in font weight that communicate the hierarchy of information. Just Wonderful is all the way at the top, and that's your core heading. And it's very separate from the categories that appear below it. Dream Interpretation, My Trip to England, Favorite Music. Okay, and off to the right, we have very gray, subtle, almost faint dates that are associated with those things. So the weight of the font, the visual weight, is what allows us to discern between one type of information and the next. We should also provide clear contrast between styles so that we can draw the user's attention as needed. Here's another example where I'm looking at a reading list from a reading app. Notice that the headlines really stand out because there's a lot of contrast. They're big, they're bold, they're black. They stand out very much from the short description that appears below and also from the website source that appears above them. So our attention is absolutely drawn to those big, bold, dark areas where there's very high contrast. Another thing we do in order to use typography purposefully is we create very consistent styles. And that starts with identifying different types of content. We have headlines, we have body text, we have bullets, we have charts, etc. So each one of those is a very different type of content. Next, we create very specific styles for each. The font that's used, the weight of that font, bold versus regular, and the color of that font. If you look here at this example, there are 5 separate styles being used here. Style 1 is for the main headline. Style 2 is for the body content. Style 3 is for call-out text. And style 4 and 5 have to do with information that appears in chart or graphic form. So we've created very specific styles for each type of information that we're going to surface. Now what we do is we apply those styles consistently on every subsequent screen. And here's an example of how we do that. If we move to another screen in the same app, notice that we are reusing the styles that we've already created. Style 1 is used once again for the headline. Style 2 is used once again for body text. Style 3 is used once again for the call-out. Style 5 is once again used for a visual description, a visual chart, a visual accompaniment of some kind. Okay, the point is we created a bunch of styles and we are now applying them consistently through every single screen. That consistency enhances usability, increases comprehension, and improves overall user experience.